"I swear I didn't touch her," he said calmly, while she sat on the floor with a swollen lip and shaking hands. The cops looked at her, then at him, and nodded. They believed him. And that was the moment Sarah realized help wasn't coming. Just 15 minutes earlier, everything was different. Sarah had been curled up with a book wrapped in a soft blanket when a scream ripped through the wall. It wasn't just yelling. It wasn't just another argument. It was the kind of scream that freezes your blood. High, sharp, terrified. She jumped to her feet, heart hammering in her chest. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone. She hesitated for half a second, then dialed 911. 911? What's your emergency? Her voice came out in pieces. My neighbor, she's screaming. Her husband? Please, send someone. The dispatcher asked for details, but Sarah barely heard. She gave the address, her name, and then she waited. She could hear nothing through the wall. No yelling, no movement, just silence. And that silence was worse than the scream. When the sirens finally echoed down the street, her knees almost gave out. She ran to the door, breath sharp and shallow. 2 officers walked in, steady, professional. They knocked. The door opened, and there he was, calm, collected, her best friend's husband. "Officers," he said like he'd been expecting them. "Is there a problem?" Behind him, Emily stood in the kitchen corner. Her lip was split. Her hands were shaking, but she forced a nod. "I fell," she whispered. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. The husband smiled softly, like this was all just a silly misunderstanding. And the officers, they believed him. "We'll handle it, ma'am," one of them told Sarah politely. But they didn't handle it. They told him to keep things calm. They told Emily she could call if she needed help again. And then they left. Just like that. Sarah stood there frozen. He leaned against the doorframe, gave her a look, the kind that says, "You can't touch me." The door clicked shut, and in the quiet hallway, Sarah realized she had done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. She didn't know it yet, but that night wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The hallway still smelled like burnt coffee and cleaning spray. Sarah leaned against the wall, cold seeping through her back, as 2 officers stepped into Emily's apartment. She thought their arrival would fix everything. She thought help had finally come, but instead of shouting, instead of handcuffs, there was only quiet. A flickering kitchen light, a bruised woman standing in the corner, and a man, calm, steady, believable. "Officers," he said smoothly, like he'd practiced this moment. "There's been a misunderstanding. She tripped. We argued a little, but nothing happened." Emily stood near the counter, her arms wrapped tightly around her body, her lip still bleeding. But when the officer asked if it was true, she nodded. Just a small, broken nod. I fell," she whispered. Sarah's throat burned. She wanted to scream, to grab Emily's shoulders and make her tell the truth. But she just stood there, watching everything fall apart in slow motion. The officer, with tired eyes, asked, "Do you need medical help?" She shook her head. "Do you want to press charges?" Another shake. And behind her, her husband's faint smile never wavered. One of the officers turned to Sarah. "You're the neighbor?" "Yes," she said quickly. "I heard her scream. I heard something crash. It wasn't just an argument. Please." He nodded politely. Too politely. "The involved party says it was an accident. There's not much we can do." Not much we can do. The words hit her like a punch in the chest. A few more questions, a few meaningless nods. Then the officers told him to keep things calm tonight. They told Emily to call if she needed anything. And then they walked out. He leaned against the doorway as the door closed, and he gave Sarah a look she would never forget. A quiet, smug kind of smile. The kind that says, "You lost." Emily didn't say a word. She just closed the door slowly. The lock clicked like the end of something. Sarah was left alone in the hallway, holding a useless phone in her hand, her heartbeat still echoing in her ears. She had trusted the system. She thought it would save her friend. But the flashing red and blue lights faded down the street, and nothing changed. In that silence, Sarah understood something she had never wanted to believe. That sometimes, even when you call for help, no one really hears you. The night the cops believed him, something in Sarah shifted. She went home, but the silence didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. She sat on the couch, knees pulled close to her chest, staring at the dark ceiling. Through the wall, she could hear faint sounds. Not screams anymore, just footsteps. And somehow, that made it worse. She kept replaying the moment in her head. The calm way he spoke, the tired way the officers nodded, the way Emily said, "I fell." It was like watching a play she wasn't allowed to interrupt, like everyone had already chosen their roles. Sarah whispered to herself, "They believed him." The words made her chest tighten, because they weren't supposed to. They were supposed to see the truth. She picked up her phone more than once that night, thought about calling again, thought about barging over, but she didn't, because she was scared too. Not of him, but of being powerless. Morning came gray and quiet. When she stepped outside, she saw him, standing by his car, smiling. "Morning," he said casually, like nothing had happened, like the night before was just a bad dream. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to keep walking. She saw Emily at the mailbox a few hours later. Dark glasses, long sleeves. She didn't look up at Sarah, just whispered, "I'm fine." But she could hear it in her voice. She wasn't fine. That's when Sarah understood something cruel and real. People like him know how to be believed. He wasn't just dangerous because he hurt Emily. He was dangerous because he could make it look like he didn't. He had the calm voice, the steady hands, the charm, the story that made sense to people who didn't want to look too closely. And Emily, she had fear. She had silence. And silence doesn't win. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep again. She paced the kitchen floor, the same thoughts circling her mind over and over. If they won't protect her, who will? She didn't have an answer yet, but something inside her was beginning to stir. A quiet kind of anger, not loud, not wild, but steady. And that was the beginning of something she didn't even recognize at the time. She was done believing him. She was going to make someone else believe her.
Silence used to be peaceful for Sarah. A cup of tea, a book, a quiet night. But after that night, silence changed. It felt heavier, like something was waiting in it. Every sound through the wall made her jump. A door closing, a cabinet opening, footsteps that weren't hers. She didn't hear screams anymore, but she didn't need to, because silence, real silence, can be louder than any scream. Days went by. Emily stopped answering texts. She didn't come by for coffee. She didn't laugh in the hallway the way she used to. It was like she was slowly disappearing. Sarah knocked on her door twice. Once in the morning, once at night. No answer. The third time, he opened the door, and that same smile was waiting for her. "She's fine," he said easily. "Just tired. We're trying to keep things quiet." His tone was so casual, as if he was the one keeping her safe, but Sarah could feel it. A pressure in the air, like something was wrong inside that apartment. That night, she sat on her couch with all the lights off, just listening. She heard nothing, not even breathing through the wall. And in that silence, guilt began to grow like a shadow. She replayed the moment she'd called the cops. She replayed the look on his face, the way the officers nodded, the way Emily nodded. She whispered into the empty room, "I should have done more." But the truth was, she didn't know what more looked like. How do you help someone who isn't allowed to ask for help? The silence stretched for nights. Every hour that passed felt like a door closing. She thought about calling again, but what if they didn't believe her this time either? What if it made things worse for Emily? So she waited, listened, watched. And with each day that passed, her quiet fear began turning into something else, a decision. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do yet, but she knew this. She couldn't keep pretending silence was safe, because silence wasn't peace anymore. It was a warning, and Sarah was finally starting to listen.
It happened on a Wednesday night, the kind of night when the world feels almost too quiet. Sarah was halfway through making dinner when she heard it, a sound she hadn't heard in weeks. A crash. Not a soft noise, not like someone dropping a cup. A crash that sounded like something breaking or someone being broken. Then, a muffled sob. Her whole body went still. The knife she was holding hovered over the cutting board. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "Not again," she whispered. But it was happening again. The same pattern, the same sounds, the same silence after. Sarah pressed her ear against the wall. Nothing. Just that deep, terrifying quiet she'd come to know too well. Her chest burned with frustration. She had done the right thing before, and they didn't believe her. She had trusted the system. It failed. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone again. The same number, the same 3 digits, 911. She stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the call button. For a split second, doubt crept in. What if nothing changes? What if they believe him again? But then she pictured Emily's face, the bruises, the quiet nod, the fear. And something inside Sarah snapped. She hit call. 911, what's your emergency? Her voice was steadier this time. This isn't the first time. He's hurting her. Please, hurry. She didn't wait by the door like before. This time, she went outside. She stood in the hallway. She wanted him to see her when the police arrived. Minutes later, the red and blue lights painted the walls again. 2 different officers this time. Their boots echoed up the stairs. He opened the door, looking calm again, but not as calm as before. Sarah saw it. A flicker, a small crack in the mask. They went inside. She couldn't see what happened next, but she heard voices. His was louder this time. Hers was shaking. Her heart pounded like it might break through her chest. She wanted to run in. She wanted to pull Emily out. But all she could do was stand there and wait. Then, the sound she had been waiting for. Footsteps. But this time, they weren't leaving empty-handed. One officer stepped out with Emily behind him. Her face pale, her eyes red. But she wasn't nodding this time. She was crying. And for the first time, she didn't whisper, "I'm fine." That was the moment Sarah knew. The silence had broken.
The night they took Emily out of the apartment, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp cutting through the darkness. Her hands shook, not from fear this time, but from something heavier: responsibility. She knew what would happen next. The system would ask for proof, for facts, for something solid. Words weren't enough. Screams weren't enough. Even bruises weren't always enough. She stared at the empty table. Then she opened the drawer, the one she had been avoiding for weeks. Inside were small, quiet truths she'd collected without even realizing it. A photo of Emily with a cut on her cheek. Another with bruises under her sleeve. A voice message from a night Emily had called her, whispering, terrified, "He's mad. I don't know what to do." At the time, she had just saved them. She hadn't known why, but now she did. She spread the evidence on the table like puzzle pieces, and for the first time, she didn't feel helpless. She placed everything in a plain manila envelope. Her hands moved carefully, like it was something fragile, because it was. It was Emily's truth. She wrote down dates, times, every scream she remembered, every moment that felt wrong, every time she almost called for help. When she was done, the envelope was full. She held it in her hands for a long time. She thought about what it meant, about how everything could get worse before it got better. She thought about how many times Emily had whispered, "I'm fine," and how many times she had believed it, because it was easier to believe the lie. But not anymore. The next morning, she walked out with the envelope pressed to her chest. The city was still waking up. The sky was pale and cold. Every step toward the police station felt heavy, but she didn't turn back. When she reached the desk, the officer looked up, tired but polite. "Can I help you?" Sarah's voice didn't shake. "Yes, I need to report something, and this time, I have proof." She placed the envelope down on the counter. It made a soft sound when it landed, but to her, it sounded louder than a scream. The officer opened it slowly. He didn't brush her off this time. He didn't say, "There's not much we can do." This time, someone listened. As she walked out into the cold morning air, Sarah exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. She had turned silence into something real, and that was only the beginning. The police station smelled like stale coffee and cold air. It wasn't a warm place, but for the first time, it felt like somewhere she might be heard. Sarah sat on a hard chair, the manila envelope on the desk between her and the officer. Her hands were clenched tight in her lap. She expected to be brushed off again. She expected the same tired look, the same line, "There's not much we can do." But this time, it was different. The officer, older, calm, patient, picked up the envelope. He didn't rush through it. He laid each photo flat. He played the voicemail twice. He listened. "These are serious," he finally said, looking up. "Thank you for bringing this in." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She didn't say anything, but inside, something uncurled. Something that had been locked tight for weeks. Hope. He asked questions, real questions this time. Dates, times, what she saw, what she heard. Sarah answered every single one. Her voice shook sometimes, but she didn't stop talking. And when she was done, the officer leaned forward slightly. "We can act on this." Those 5 words hit her like a breath of air after drowning. We can act on this. She signed statements, she filled out forms,
She handed over the evidence, like passing a piece of her heart. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy, but it was moving. For the first time, the weight wasn't all on her. When she walked outside, the sky was gray, but she didn't feel small anymore. She wasn't just a neighbor on the other side of the wall. She was a voice. 2 days later, an officer called her. "We've opened a case," he said. "She's going to be safe." Sarah sat down on the edge of her bed, gripping the phone like a lifeline. She didn't cry. She just breathed. In, out. For the first time, it felt like breathing meant something. She knew it wouldn't fix everything overnight, but she also knew this: they weren't ignoring her anymore. Someone finally listened. And in that moment, Sarah understood. Sometimes change doesn't start with shouting. Sometimes it starts with not giving up. And she was just getting started.
It was just after midnight when Sarah's phone buzzed. The sound was small, but it made her sit up straight. A message, just 3 words. "Can I come?" Her chest tightened. She didn't need to ask who it was. She didn't need to ask why. Emily had finally reached the edge. Sarah typed back fast. "Yes, come now." She didn't turn on all the lights. She just left the hallway lamp glowing, the front door unlocked. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound outside made her heart race. She kept imagining footsteps that weren't hers. Then came the knock. Light, hesitant, like a bird tapping on glass. Sarah opened the door slowly, and there she was. Emily stood there in the dark, a bag slung over her shoulder, a bruise fading on her cheek. Her hands were shaking. She whispered, "I can't stay anymore." Sarah didn't ask questions. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just stepped aside and said, "Come in." Emily crossed the threshold like someone stepping off a cliff. She closed the door behind her and exhaled. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried years of pain. They sat at the kitchen table in silence at first. Sarah made tea. Emily stared at her hands like she wasn't sure if they still belonged to her. Then, softly, she started to talk. About the nights, the shouting, the control, the way he made her believe no one would ever help her. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She kept talking. Sarah didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened. And somewhere in that quiet kitchen, Emily's voice grew a little steadier. Not strong yet, but steady. She said, "I don't know what happens next." Sarah reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not alone anymore." Emily nodded slowly, like those words were new. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have certainty, but she had somewhere else to be. And sometimes, that's the first step out. As Sarah watched her fall asleep on the couch a few hours later, she realized something. This was no longer just about calling for help. This was about standing between her friend and the darkness and not moving. People think escape is the end, but Sarah learned it's only the beginning. The days after Emily left weren't filled with relief. They were filled with paperwork, fear, sleepless nights, and silence. Emily stayed on Sarah's couch, 2 bags by the door, a blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. She jumped at every sound in the hallway. Even the creak of the floor made her flinch. The police had taken her statement. Lawyers had started calling, social workers, officers, questions.
Over and over, Emily had to talk about things she'd tried so hard to survive. And every time she spoke, she lost a little more of the strength she was trying to rebuild. Sarah sat with her through all of it. In waiting rooms, on late-night calls, sometimes talking, sometimes just being there. But it wasn't easy for either one of them. He didn't disappear. He called from unknown numbers. He sent messages, accusing, twisting, blaming. Emily would stare at the phone with empty eyes, like the words were pulling her back into the darkness she'd just left. Sarah blocked the numbers. She filed reports. "He doesn't get to control you anymore," she said. Some days, Emily seemed strong. She got out of bed, cooked breakfast, smiled a little. Other days, she barely spoke. Healing, Sarah realized, isn't a straight line. It's messy. Loud some days, silent others. One night, Sarah found Emily sitting on the couch, knees pulled up, whispering, "What if they believe him again?" Sarah sat down beside her. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She just squeezed her hand and said, "Then we keep going." The first court date came. Sarah watched Emily freeze the moment she saw him again. That calm mask, that fake smile, the same man who nearly convinced the world he was innocent. But Emily stood. She spoke. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. Sarah held her hand the entire time. Outside the courthouse, Emily collapsed against her shoulder. No words, just a long, shaking breath. That day didn't fix everything, but it was a brick, a solid piece of a new foundation. The hard days didn't end overnight, but slowly, very slowly, the nights got quieter, the mornings a little brighter, and beneath all the pain, something steady was growing. Strength. And this time, it wasn't the kind that fades in silence. It was the kind that stays. It was a small apartment. White walls, secondhand furniture, a single plant on the windowsill. But when Sarah stepped inside, it felt warm. Months had passed since the night Emily knocked on her door. The bruises were gone now, but the memory of them still lived quietly behind her eyes. She didn't speak about him much anymore, not because she forgot, but because she was building something new, a life that didn't revolve around fear. Sarah watched as Emily made coffee in her small kitchen. Her hands didn't shake like they used to. She laughed at something small, something silly, and it didn't sound forced. Healing wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet mornings like this one. Emily had found a job. She was talking to a therapist. She had a lock on her door that she trusted. There were still bad days, nights where the memories slipped back in, but she had learned something she once thought she never could: how to keep going. Sarah leaned back against the couch and let the moment sink in. She remembered the first scream, the call, the door opens in the middle of the night, the fear, the court, the waiting. And now, she was looking at the proof of what it means to not give up. Emily sat beside her with 2 mugs of coffee. For a long time, they didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Everything had changed. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but it had changed. "You saved me," Emily whispered suddenly. Sarah shook her head. "No, you saved you. I just didn't let you do it alone." A small tear rolled down Emily's cheek, but this time it wasn't from pain. Outside, the city moved on like it always does. Cars, people, life. But inside that little apartment, 2 women sat in quiet victory. Not the kind that makes the news, not the kind that looks like a movie ending, but the kind that matters, the kind built out of courage. One decision, one night,
one person refusing to stay silent. Sarah didn't see herself as a hero. She was just a friend. But sometimes that's all it takes to change a life. And as she held that warm mug in her hands, she knew something simple, something steady. She didn't give up, and neither did Emily. And that was everything.
Like and share this story if you believe that domestic violence is bad. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this.